From the trenches of motorsports and Gearhead Central, this is RealTuners Radio, your all-motor, boosted, and nitrous-fed hour of power. Now, here's your hosts, the Reverends of RPM, the Faction of Traction, John Bewley, Scott Clark, Bill Fowler, Scott Evans, Mark Dahlquist, Mike Perduto, James Short, Tom Sewell, Brian Barnhill. This is RealTuners Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RealTuners Radio, episode 111. Tonight's guest, Troy Baum from RACEWIRES, one of the most popular and productive guys out there wiring everything from race cars to street cars. Thanks for being tuned in, and now it's time for RealTuners Radio. Oh, what's going on, everybody? Sorry for the delayed start there. I kind of messed up, but anyway, got her figured out. Not too bad. Getting this new rig figured out. So, welcome aboard. Welcome to episode 111. It's January 22nd, 2020. Kicking things off this new year pretty solid. All right, guys, are you there? Evan still put me on blast or what?
Yep.
I mean, would you expect anything else?
No different. Nope, I would expect nothing better.
I'm busy arguing with the Stream Element spot again.
What?
I will mute him. I will put him in timeout if we have to.
Shut that thing down, whatever you need to do.
It just says Stream Elements bot running Pajal, but it hasn't. I swore at it and it deleted me yet. So.
Oh yes, it did.
Oh, did it?
No.
Right now.
Scott muted it.
Moderator. Okay, he's no longer moderator.
Scott, you're taking my fun away.
Oh, sorry. No. I took out the Stream Elements moderator guy.
Yeah, okay. It said you muted him. I was like, he beat me to it.
Just audio okay? What do you mean deja vu? Drink. Everybody's talking about drink. Oh shit!
Isn't that every week?
I thought RealTuners Radio was a drinking game.
I thought it was too.
It's becoming one.
All right, we got good audio.
Okay, so what are we actually doing tonight?
I think we're going to start off with some QA because Troy is going to be a little bit late. Here we go. I got all our pretty faces on video.
Does anyone want to hear about Dan Parker's Corvette?
Yes. I do want to hear about Dan Parker's
Sure.
Corvette. But tell it the nice
Okay.
way, not the, oh my God, this harness was a pain in the ass to install way.
Actually, okay, so the harness was from PSI, and their customer support was absolutely top-notch, spectacular. What just happened?
I don't know.
Somebody's got the stream going in their microphone.
Anybody there?
It's Troy.
Yeah. You're somebody. Oh, it's Troy.
Make yourself louder, Troy.
We hear
That's
you.
what we gotta do.
Hello?
There you
Hello.
go.
Are you there? Am I in?
Here.
You're here.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
We hear
guys.
you, Troy.
Oh, good. I guess.
It's good. You made it home? Are you on your way home?
I just got into the shop. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's kind of
You're a
quiet.
little soft.
Yeah, it's a little bit quiet.
Let me switch something up here.
You can do that. We're going to talk about something else anyway. Let us know when you want to try again or message me or whatever. But anyway.
Chris is reporting echo, Scott.
Is this any better, guys?
Yes, that is better.
That's good.
Okay, cool. I switched over to Bluetooth.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I think Chris
Mark-
is just hearing Troy in the background. I don't think we have an echo from what I can hear.
Nope, I don't hear any echoes. I think it's just somebody's speaker turned up a little hot. No big deal. So, Mark, back to Dan Parker's car that you spent.
No, I don't hear any echo. I think we're fine.
So
Anybody else
the
wanna
guys
talk
at
about
PSI, they,
Sorry. Carry on, Mark.
is it okay? The guys at PSI, like their customer support when I called them was spectacular. They took their, Saturday, Sunday didn't matter. The customer support was spectacular. The only problem we had was that the harness, they weren't ready with their 58X harness for this car. So they sent a 24X, and pins and all the wire colors were labeled wrong. And I was supposed to get a conversion chart, and it just took a while. So it made it a little more hassle, but I didn't have any problems with the quality of the harness or anything like that. It was just the documentation wasn't quite ready. That was the only downside to it, but it came out really nice. The color was beautiful.
Yeah.
From one end to the other. And I got to Florida Tuesday afternoon, and I walk in the shop, and here's Dan Parker, blind, in some other guy's shop, running some other guy's mill, and the Joey Martin race cars, and the mill is kind of sticky. So Dan disassembles the mill, lubricates cleans and lubricates the ways and the screw, for the mill. And he goes, that'll be a lot better. And then he takes the stuff that he's been machining. He goes over to the belt sander, deep burrs it. Then he puts holes in it, taps it, and he's making his own T-blocks for the trailer, for the sliding rails in the trailer. And he made like 20 T-blocks. And it's like he's doing this and he doesn't know where anything is and just doing it without any help. The guy is amazing. So
awesome.
Anyone listening to the podcast, if you aren't following Dan Parker, if you aren't following Tragedy to Triumph Racing, go over and check it out. The guy is incredible, and looking to set a couple of Guinness Book of World Records with his Corvette coming up here in the end of February. So,
and in case you want to support him, if you want to know how, this pen that I have sitting on my desk here is one that he sells and he makes himself. So feel free to support him and purchase a pen. He sells pens and razors. He's got a couple different versions of it, a couple different colors, and they are phenomenal. It is by far the best pen I have used to write with so far. It's amazing.
And every pen purchase, Dan makes those pens himself, and every pen purchase goes towards the race car.
Hold that thing up to the camera again, Scott. Yep. I just got you full screened. There you go. perfect. Those pens are badass. It's like high-end executive style pen turned on a lathe.
All right.
Anyway.
And Troy, before you talk again, I want to say that Scott has a message here that says when you're talking, your phone number is popping up on the screen. So we want to do something about that before we broadcast your phone number to like every person in the world.
I appreciate that.
Do you want everybody having your phone number?
Absolutely not.
Bad enough as
you mean you don't want to call? You don't want to call at 3 a.m. on Sunday, wondering if they can order a switch set?
Oh, come on! I get that enough from my clients now.
Right.
That's a beautiful pen, by the way. I'm watching live on YouTube, and I don't know who I'm looking at, but that's
Evans.
That's Scott Evans, but yeah. Like I said, go to the pens can be purchased at theblindmachinist.com. Dan Parker's a world champion pro mod driver that lost his vision in a sight, and was it 2012?
No, it was earlier than that.
Or 2011? Or anyway, I forget.
remember.
But
We'll put it this way. He's a race car driver who was in a wreck and woke up to not having any sight at all, lights out, completely black due to some swelling that crushed his optic nerves. He's still going to be a race car driver because he's going to drive 200 miles an hour on the salt flats. It's going to be awesome.
well, he already set a world record on his motorcycle on salt flats. The Corvette he's hoping not to take to the salt ever. The race the Corvette is at a space shuttle landing site. It's like 2.5 miles of concrete out in the desert in New Mexico. And the reason he doesn't want to bring the Corvette on the salt is because of the cleanup mess, the amount of rust he had on his motorcycle and everything. He'd prefer not to. But it's a beautiful car. I could talk about the car for 2 hours. It's very, very well built, very nice. A lot of compliments from a lot of people in the industry, but just go follow Dan Parker or The Blind Machinist or Tragedy to Triumph to Racing. All three are Dan Parker, but you got to go check it out. That's it. That's my sales pitch.
Yep.
TheBlindMachinist.com
is where you want to go for that.
For the pens, yep.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got Troy Baum on tonight. And did you get your phone issue fixed?
I'm not sure what to do about it, bud.
No, it sounds good.
I'm not.
No, but as far as the display goes,
Yep, you're all good.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
We can't see his ugly mug on video. I mean, you should turn on your video. We can't force him to do that, can we? You can just record.
Well, no, if he's just calling in, so he won't be able to do that. It's just a regular dial-in.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
He's not using the app like we are.
No problem. Where does
I
Fowler
paid
go
for
tonight?
radio.
I didn't hear from
Fowler
him.
said he'd be on a little later.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, welcome aboard, Troy. Good to have you back, man.
Thanks,
schedule
dude. Thanks
kinda
for
got
having
screwed
me,
up.
guys.
I apologize.
Is my phone number still on the screen or no?
Nope, we fixed it.
No, we solved that.
Thanks.
It's my
And-
phone number.
and
Please get it off air.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that Scott can edit that out on the video feed.
Sure.
That's all good. I appreciate it.
Yep, we can fix
So
that. That's
let's
easy to
talk
fix.
about some race wires.
Yeah, man. Let's talk.
What do you got
You
that's
guys
new and
want-
what do you got that's new and exciting? Let's start out with new and exciting. That's always good.
New and exciting. In my world, that's usually every project, because they're all different. Different ECU, different relay board, strategy, layout, the whole works. So it's enough to keep me on my toes all the time. That's for sure. A lot of learning curves.
Well, like, are you doing anything that's out of the norm, out of the ordinary right now? Like that would be a kind of a special project. You're not, making a board for the space shuttle or anything like that.
Yeah, I just finished up a space shuttle project. That was a Corvette with full Motec M150 and the PDM that went along with it. And now I'm doing a Pro EFI system with the ECU Masters PMU.
Okay.
I haven't worked with one of them before, but it seems really cool. So it's a little box that basically takes the place of all your traditional relays and fuses, and it allows you to configure and program everything from your water pumps, fans, lights, turn signals. You can make your outputs flash.
We were just talking about that before. I did that on a project car last week, and I posted that on the Facebook page.
Awesome. Yeah. What system were you using?
That one was a Morris Tech. I've used the EC Master quite a bit. EC Master,
Okay.
Morris Tech. Morris Tech is a company out of Australia, kind of a small company, but they're resold through RealTuners in the U.S. And I know Ryan over at RealTuners makes a bunch of chassis harnesses with them. They make a 30 channel and a 12 channel. The 12 channel is nice for guys that are a little bit more on a budget, because the PMU 16, the EC Master, is you're going to get the channels you're going to get for guys that are just running an engine or just a chassis. Sometimes it's a little much, but yeah, it's a lot of options out there. I'd definitely be interested to hear what your thoughts are on the PDMs you've been using, because there's a lot out there and a lot that have come to market within the last year or two.
There really is. So like the 16 that I'm using, the PMU 16, I completely maxed it out. So I think the 30, what you were saying, that could really come in handy, I think, for full street strip cars. We're also utilizing a CAN bus switch panel, which is nice because that's also completely programmable.
Are you using, so one thing a lot of guys don't realize about a lot of these is, so EC Master sells their CAN panel. A lot of these other guys do. The EC Master specifically, the CAN panel everybody uses, the M-Tron CAN panel, the Motec CAN panel, all of the Morris Tech stuff, that typical, it's the white background that you put the stickers over, square buttons. It's like Gray Hill keypad. ECU Masters, the PMU 16, actually has a drop down. You can go buy a CAN pad from DigiKey or Mauser, plug it right in, and the programming function is built right into the PMU software.
I did not know that. I've just been working with it on the ECU Master software
badass.
Yeah, and
side of it.
They're so it's in the EC Master software that you can do the Gray Hill. It's defaulted to their CAN pad, which is nice because it has like 4 different color LEDs and stuff like that. But a lot of guys, the Gray Hill is just that traditional race car look that a lot of guys want. And I have a drift driver, Shane Whaley, it's a Haltech with the PMU 16, which if you know what you're doing with CAN, there's some of the pre-built-in streams where you can pull a stream into ECU Master, but you can actually send the ECU Master data back to the Haltech and do technically up to 16 channels. I haven't worked with the decoding on the CAN bus on the DPOs to get them to work, but I am adding 8 AVIs to any of the Haltech Elite 1500s or 2500s or thousands, any of the 1000 series ECUs. That definitely helps the dollar argument for the PDM, because now it's taking the place of basically 2 IO boxes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a big thing with a lot of the ECUs out there running out of, I mean, it blows my mind, but we actually run out of inputs and outputs. I don't want to say fairly often, but you get pretty involved projects, you're cutting it close.
I mean, I'm pretty often, I was glad when the Dominator came out with so much IO for the money.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, but still I find myself running out of things all the time. I need some CAN expansion or something,
Yeah. Are you guys doing anything over at RaceWire, getting more involved in CAN? There's so much more out there, and the trick is getting all these devices to play nice with each other. And you can do it if you want to spend hours programming CAN, but is there anything out there you guys are doing with CAN bus, or mostly trying to work with what's built into the products you guys are working with already?
Yeah, so I deal with the project at hand. So I do need to up my game on the CAN side of things, and you guys could would be a huge help with that. I haven't had the time to get out and play with all that. I'm, currently just taking care of each project, giving everybody what they want, and then some, try to go above and beyond. And then, I do need to up my game on that. That's my goal for this year.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole talk just about that. There's a bunch of really cool stuff out there, including these little CAN gateways that let you take multiple CAN buses that normally wouldn't talk to each other and cross communicate. So it's just really useful if you're using like a vehicle where you're putting a PDM or an ECU in our case, so you say an FRS, GT86, whatever, super CAN heavy vehicle. And you want to keep all the stuff, but now you've got, say, a Haltech ECU and some other PDM, and you want them all to talk to each other. The problem is they're sometimes even on completely different CAN ID setups, so getting them to talk to each other is real tricky. So there's a lot of devices even out there to do that. So the CAN integrations come a long way. Wiring Specialties does, anyone looking at harnesses, I don't know if you used any off-the-shelf options like that, but they've got CAN modules for 350Zs. A lot of the common tuner cars doing LS swaps, so they get to keep their traction control. You can run their stock pedal, and it does the drive-by-wire stuff for you. A lot of really cool stuff like that with CAN. So that would be that's a topic I love to talk about, but I don't know how down that rabbit hole we want to go tonight.
I'll do a whole nother show with you and just listen to you tell me about CAN bus.
Yeah, anyone looking? I know you do a lot of Haltech stuff. They helped me with some of that stuff, getting me some of the info I needed. And that's where we did a project where we used 8 channels from the PMU to bring them all into the Elite 1500 in that case, because the same thing, we were maxed out. We just had so many switches and sensors, and when you start running 3 combo sensors, you've got fuel pressure temp, coolant pressure temp, oil pressure temp, and then crankcase pressure. That really adds up. And then you've got traction control switch or knob on top of that. It just it really kills your IO. But I have the CAN bus definition stuff for that, and it's really not that hard. I can probably put together a base PMU file for anyone that would be interested in doing that. So if Troy, if you're interested in that, I can get with you and send that over with some information. But if any listeners out there are trying to do that stuff, it really helps stretch how far you can take what's out there already, and it can make a huge difference in just a couple of sensors.
I'm absolutely I'm definitely interested in that. In my personal street car, I need to add some extra inputs, and I think I could do it through my Strada dash, my AIM dash, and then
the AIM stuff is really cool. And if you're not aware of it, AIM is releasing a PDM. It's actually already out. That's has an integrated data logger and display driver involved in it. So it's a data logger, 30 channel PDM, and a display.
Hey, Brian, hold on one second. Hey, Troy, try to step away from the group of people who are being very loud behind you, because it's picking up quite loud, and we want to try to keep that stuff down if we can. So try to step away from the other noise and chatter that we're seeing there coming down the pipeline. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught that. The AIM PDM is for someone especially that doesn't already have a dash. They have a version without the dash that's a little bit cheaper, but they have a version that, because the display driver is already in the PDM, it's a dash display with a PDM, a 32-channel PDM it even has 35 amp outputs, multiple 35, multiple 30, and multiple 25 amp outputs. So really flexible. With all the AIM data logging stuff built in, so you can bring anything over via CAN, the same as you would on your dash. I believe retail on that's $2,300. So I think we're gonna. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Is that has 4 half bridge outputs too, right?
Yes, yep, exactly. So it's real nice for driving any kind of motor or something like that. And we're looking at using that on the Sorensen Motorsports Trophy truck. Because we even need their expansion, because we have something like 120 amps and lights alone on that truck, because it's built to run Baja. So, and we want to be able to run everything at once, because if you're running at the middle of the night and you're bogged down in some silt and something's gotten up in your fuel pump and you're running both pumps, we don't want to have to shut the truck down for any reason. So the most we let it do is shut down half the lights until you're out and you can get to a service station.
So have you maxed out a PD? Like, so I haven't ran one on the street yet, a PMU of any type other than a smart wire,
okay.
Which they're fantastic.
Yes, I have run out of channel.
Yeah, it's real easy, especially if you're doing chassis and engine stuff. Even so, I'll use that. Scott can pull up that blinky light video if you want to see the stupid stuff I do. But that car is it's a RB26 swapped, so a GTR or Nissan Skyline GTR engine in an E30 BMW. So we completely rewired the car at Ace Performance. Currently has a Link ECU in it. I think we're putting an M-Tron in it. I think that's the end goal. We're running all the power to ECU, which is pretty straightforward. It's a couple channels. We have an ignition channel, just a main EFI channel, and that's it for engine power, because that's how the wiring specialties harness is set up. And then we're running everything on the chassis, and on outputs, we're really close to maxed out. We've got a couple, but once you do left and right turn signals, brake lights, tail lights, headlights, high beams, wipers, really cool stuff about some of the PDMs for guys that are doing this on street cars is wiper park. It sounds dumb, but when you turn your wipers off and they get stuck halfway up, or you're trying to time them, they'll do a wiper park. So you have an input that lets you know when the wipers are parked, and when you turn it off, it's just like a normal car. They keep going until they're back down at the bottom position. If you get really fancy with it, you can do this in the PMU, or you can do it in the Morris Tech, anything that has logic or programming, which is one of the really things that sets the PMU apart. I really like its interface for being able to do functions and programming. There's some really cool stuff you can do there, but I actually have race cars with intermittent wipers, because all I do is put a delay in it. So the wipers go at low speed, or I can drive them at PWM if the wiper motor lets me. And then when they come back down, it has a delay, and I can change that delay to have multi-speed intermittent wipers. So we've got race cars that are fully gutted, basically race chassis, but guys still drive wipers.
Yep.
And they have intermittent wipers. Yeah. It sounds dumb.
Sick.
No, it's
even
cool.
Stuff like flash to pass. The way it's wired is really dumb in a lot of cases. When you rip all that out and simplify your high beam switch with a ground switch, I still set them up where the high beams won't come on unless the headlights are on, because you don't want to hit your high beam switch and be driving down the road with your high beams on.
Yep.
But normally that means you lose your flash to pass function. In the Morris Tech, it lets me write a again, a logic where it'll flash it so many times and then stop until it sees a reset. So you still retain your flash to pass. And I even set it up to flash at a certain pattern. So it's not just a single flash. It'll actually flash at a certain pattern. And it's New England. Guys are assholes. They're not going to move you if you flash them, but we're going to try. So
Yeah.
I used to do the same thing on mine, which, I made it so that I could still hit the high beam flash when I needed it, even if the lights weren't on.
That's how so I guess I usually just rip the factory intermittent modules out of a factory car and figure it out and wire it in, because I like to be anal about that too, having the wipers park and everything. And that's sweet that you're able to do that, all programming without the OEM module in place, and you're able to make all that happen.
Yeah, it's real nice. It was, and that was. I'm trying to pull open the video now. I'm gonna have to go to my Facebook, Scott, because it's on my phone.
How come I couldn't find it under either Brian Barnhill's Facebook wall?
I posted it on the RealTuners
Tuner Tools
site as well, on the RealTuners Facebook page. Yep.
I say if it's on your phone, can you message the group and then upload it?
Yeah, we'll play it that way.
It
was pretty cool. My first experience with doing that kind of stuff was on Larry Larson's truck with the smart wire. We wired up that truck had to pull a trailer, and so it ran the regular tail lights and everything, then the trailer lights, the running lights, and you could do all kinds of neat stuff. Like, we were using the race pack switch panels, but we had it set up so that you couldn't go on the trans brake unless the drive shaft speed was below like 2 miles an hour, and you couldn't. You couldn't pop it into reverse, but that switch worked as a reverse. We put a reverse switch on the dash so that if you stopped, hit the button, hit the switch, it would be in reverse, so you didn't have to hold the button down. Just all kinds of cool stuff to make it streetable or tolerable.
Yeah.
Did you find it, Brian?
A lot of people don't understand that they're programmable, and they just use them for very basic functions. Oh, I turn on a switch and something turns on. Oh, I turn off the switch and it turns off. And a lot of people feel that they're overpriced because of that reason, because they don't understand the power behind them, and that you can really do so much stuff with them. But that's why the price is there, is because they're programmable. And what you're paying for is the ability to really, really be flexible with all of your outputs that need some sort of power.
Well, it's nice because you can actually take over what the ECU cannot. If your ECU is not capable of, controlling your dump valve, at staging, at the release of the brake, if you want it to come on down track, you could do all that with the PMU if your ECU cannot.
And the other power there is the synergy too. What you're talking about with how CAN bus is, and anyone that's on the fence about a PDM, it's 100% worth the money. And there's some budget options coming down the pike too. That are going to be a lot better price for guys that are on a budget. You're not going to be able to do everything, but you can at least pick some stuff. But yeah, it's definitely well worth it. Even the PMU, for example, has an accelerometer built into it too, and a G meter. So either from the safety side, you can set it up to cut either all channels or certain channels if it detects your G-forces over a certain amount. So in a crash, it can completely shut down your fuel system and make sure that there's no problems there or anything like that. Not every ECU has that. Not every power system has that. And, ECU Masters is also doing a CAN bus based battery disconnect. So I've been a big fan of the CarTech stuff. And I do like what they do, but they're still a dumb signal. They can't talk over CAN. The ECU Master stuff is an open CAN protocol that will work with, as long as you can understand what you're doing, with virtually any ECU as well, that will let you remotely activate your battery disconnect or your circuit breaker, whatever you want to call it, instead of having to have a big button or run a big battery up to the normal toggle style switch keypad.
Okay,
so the
other huge benefit. Go ahead.
To go. I don't know if you won't be able to see it, but I'll just start it from the top.
The other huge benefit of the PMUs is that they're solid state, which means you don't have relays that fail. And you don't have fuses that pop. They reset. You can set up an amount. If you know that your water pump draws 7 amps all the time and you want to set it as a fuse at 10 amps so you can see when something is going south to warn you, you absolutely can do that. You don't have to leave it at the 25 amp output. It can be whatever you want it to be. So now you have full control and you're able to troubleshoot. Most of them will tell you how much amperage you're drawing so you can see just what's really going on. Maybe you notice that suddenly a fuel pump is drawing a whole lot more current. Might be time to replace the fuel pump. Super great for diagnostics. And it resets. It's resettable. So when a virtual fuse pops and it turns off the circuit, you can tell it to output to give you a light to say, hey, I popped a fuse, and gives you a reason to investigate. And then you can reset it through the thing. You can tell it to auto reset. So it's just some kind of a fluke and a loose wire or something. It'll auto reset for you.
Yeah, we sell a lot of them to auto reset, especially on a critical function, and you limit the number of auto resets because I don't want a car going down the road resetting every 3 seconds. But we'll set a caution light or like a warning if we set a fuse. Hey, let's go back and look at why this reset. Is there a wiring problem? Was it a fluke? And like you mentioned, they're solid state. So the other nice thing is, a fuse. You've got a 20, 30 amp fuse on a fuel pump. Anything over that, it's going to pop. And, you starve a fuel pump for a second or something weird happens. You draw a little bit of air because your baffling your tank isn't great or something like that. That can really spike the amperage on a fuel pump, which really doesn't affect it. It wasn't going to hurt anything because it's such a minuscule amount of time. Same as inrush. When you first turn a fan or a fuel pump on, it spikes.
I was just about to say that. Yep with the fan.
The solid state stuff can do 100 plus amps at inrush. And for those of you guys that like those shitty Taurus fans, I hate those things, but everybody uses them. Come on. There's just better options out there that aren't 30-year-old junkyard fans that pull 40 freaking amps. Spall and Derail make so many good fans that I just, for the size and how much amperage they draw, and that the Taurus fan does okay, but once it starts seeing any real pressure ratio, it falls on its face hard. But there's a lot of other fans out there that are real nice that don't draw as much, but they still have a big spike when you turn them on. So you don't have to have, you guys are looking at, I have to run a 40 amp fuse on my fan so it doesn't blow. But your fan doesn't pull 40 amps continuous steady state. So you could really run a 28, 25 amp channel on that fan, and it'll handle the inrush just fine because you don't need the overhead just to let the device turn on.
Well, a lot of the PMUs you could set the inrush, right? And you could set the amount of time that set the amount of time that it hangs on that inrush before it drops down to its I guess nominal voltage.
Right.
It's normal. Have you?
And the limit of the.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the limit of the power is that it's not the PMU that's the limiting factor. It's the pins on the PMU that are the limiting factor. It comes down to physical wire gauge. So the reason that there's outputs that are rated at 30 is because the pin that power goes through is rated at 30 amps. And they're trying to keep you from melting the connector and melting the header of the circuit board in those PMUs.
Right, and that's where you see some of the Autosport stuff has an advantage is they can get a decent pin in there that can take a decent amount of amperage, but the cost on that connector is also extremely high. So that's where the Autosport version of the PMU gets a little more expensive. But they do have one, and for the guys that need some stuff like that, that's definitely well worth it.
They use in the Autosports, I think you can even get those with the DTP, the 10 to 12 gauge pins, right? Maybe. Or is that
so that's what Haltech's using on its Nexus for its high amp stuff is the DTPs. I use a lot of those. But yeah, for the most part, a lot of guys are using the Morris Tech, the HP Electrics, and a lot of the other PDMs are using, I forget which connector it is. It's not a Deutsch connector. I think it's a Tyco or amp connector. It's honestly kind of a pain to work with. They pin out okay, but the locks are super sensitive. So reworking.
The two clips on the side when you go to pop them up, they hang open. You got to push them back. The
PMU connector isn't my favorite either. The pin retention is kind of flimsy as well. But yeah, that's always the limiting factors. Is even on a DTP pin, the most a DTP can take is 25, I believe 25 amps, 20 to 25 amps. So you're limited there. So a lot of guys are just doubling up the pins. So you get 2 big pins on a 35 amp output. And if you need 35 amps all to one device, you just got to double up and do a splice on the other side, which I don't know. We could start some controversy here, Troy. If you want to do the crimp versus solder argument, that's always a fun one.
That's real easy for me. I crimp only. So
I think we're
easy.
all.
That is.
Yeah, I think most of us
that
are
is
that
super
way,
easy for me.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I want to know: have you ever, like, when I say maxed out a PMU, like, have you ever had problems with everything on, fans, pumps, and you're racing? You said the trucks in a really rough environment. So you have lights, you have everything on and functioning in your truck. Have you had a problem with power output getting hot? Do you put them on heat sinks? Like, I just put the ECU master on a 1/4-inch piece of aluminum, like heat sink.
I mean, we tend to mount them to something large like that anyways, away from so I haven't personally had a problem. We haven't put the trophy truck on one yet. That truck is going out early this year. I actually have to talk to them about that, hopefully. And see. I know they've got some guys back at the shop in Vegas working on it, and I've gotten a couple of calls. But because the AIM PDM isn't ready for it yet, I haven't seen a problem with it as long as you've been smart about the PMU. Some things to watch out for is if you've got a bunch of really high amp continuous draw stuff. The PMU documentation is really good about this. They'll tell you where that driver is located on the board. And the idea is to try to keep that load spread out so you don't overheat a portion of the board. But yeah, anything you can do to keep them cool helps. Maxed out, they're usually pretty good. What a lot of them will let you do is do a soft shutdown. So if they start to get that problem, we'll start shutting down or scaling back some of the non-critical components. So like in the trophy truck, there's redundant dashes, for example. We can shut one of the dashes down. That's super low amp draw, but you can do stuff like that and start picking and choosing and kind of have a priority set of, hey, don't kill my fuel pumps, don't kill my engine, but these are less critical things. Let's start shutting these down and, trying to let the EC recover. But the only time I've seen a problem was on a drift car, and I don't want to call them out because it was something that could happen to anybody, and they actually did really well at this event. But the PMU was mounted basically right on the trans tunnel, right by where the downpipe came. There was no heat shielding. It was a sheet metal trans tunnel to go around a dog box, and it wound up getting hot. And actually, it wasn't a problem internally. The board was fine. Their water pump turned off because it melted the retention on the pin. It actually melted the plug, and the pin wouldn't stay connected, so the water pump kept turning off. So the pin melted before the electronics got overwhelmed due to heat.
Huh. Interesting.
It's definitely possible. And like I said, I know the PMU and a bunch of the other guys do warn that, hey, if you've got, if you're using your high amp outputs and you've got, 4 that are, I think you've got eight high amp outputs on the PMU 16. And say you've got 4 that are, right at 20 amps or whatever. Don't put those all in the channels that are right next to each other. Try to split them between the 2 channels that are on each side of the PMU.
Makes sense.
Scott's saying he's a fan of mechanical relays.
I am.
I don't
sorry.
know.
Did you see these guys on here talking about this one guy had a smart wire die at an event and he was screwed? That sucks. I still like the mechanical relays. I am the Scott.
I did Halsey's Pro Mod, and we did the Motec M150 or the M130, I think it was, with Switzer Dynamics on board. And that, I think I had 14 regular mechanical relays because of the reliability factor.
Because nitrous.
I mean,
well, I would love to try a PMU on a nitrous car because I think it would be great. You could set the inrush, you could set it all up, you could set up extra safety parameters that you would not be able to dream of doing with regular mechanical stuff.
They work great on a nitrous solenoid, and you can PWM them.
Yeah, right out of PMU, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. There's
So
most
so
PDMs
could
have a certain number of PWMable output, some better than others, but for the most part, any decent one with a decent amperage output can PWM those.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I still have a lot of guys that want the regular.
Yeah, that was going to be my. It's hard in my world. It's typically the only reason guys aren't the budget drift guys are it's exactly that. It's budget. They don't see the cost benefit. But we could talk forever about how annoying that is, and we all know those people. But in the higher end motorsports and Formula Drift and even amateur grid life, global time attack level time attack stuff, that's kind of the go-to at this point. That's becoming more and more the norm. And very, very rarely have I seen a PMU cause an issue that, you could say, yeah, it is cheaper to carry a spare mechanical relay, but there's less likely of a chance that I'm going to get knocked out on the PMU versus the mechanical relay having a mechanical issue. I've seen, like I said, most of the PMU problems I've seen were something with an installation, something like that, not necessarily the PMU failed or the PDM. I guess we're kind of using the two terms interchangeably, but yeah, it's possible all electronics fail. And, if you're building a race car, you get into the argument every single electronic you should have spare of your spare solid state kill switch, your ECU, your DAC. It could get expensive. So yeah, I get that it's more expensive to carry one of those. But
Or just a spare second car.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'm not going to talk about. We've done that before, but
we've all been there.
Yeah. So I mean, we have spare modular harnesses on our Motec stuff. We can steal parts from either car to make the other one run. They're as similar as possible. And then there's room in the trailer for a third car that is very similar that we can either pull out or rob parts off of. But yeah, that once you start playing that game, it starts becoming difficult. I would rather have the solid state least likely to have a problem, and the off chance that we do have a problem, and then if it's something that is that much of a life changer, I'll just try to leave enough overhead and have a couple spare outputs. Where typically it's very rare you'll break the whole PMU or PDM and just move some outputs over. On the trophy truck, our outputs, the way I laid it out is to have spare DT connectors that if an output does go down, especially on a mission critical, our SAT, nav, and our communications are all that way. We never, ever, ever want those to go down. It's a 15-year-old brother and his 16-year-old or 17-year-old sister driving this truck, and their dad doesn't want them to get lost in the middle of the desert with no comms. So we have a lot of backups for stuff like that. So if that is a concern, it's the same as any other system. Plan for redundancy and plan for maintenance up front rather than just swapping parts when something does go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're also fairly compact. If you look at the size between how many relays you need to do all the functions that are in a PMU, you're a pretty large circuit board at that point in order to be able to do, let's say, even 15 circuits worth of relays. And a PMU capable of doing potentially 32 circuits, on the high side, fits in a 7x7 by 2-inch tall square face. It's nothing hardly. I mean, they're small.
Yeah, that's huge. Like how small it is, how much it cleans up your wiring harness. That isn't a minor thing. The size of it, how easy it is to work on, and how out of the way it can be. You used to. We've all seen the pictures of of a car. You take the dashboard off, and there's 30 breadboards or terminal strips back there, and that causes me a lot of anxiety.
I am going to agree that the installation is a lot easier if you're laying out a car from scratch and it's completely stripped out, and you got to put it back to even some semblance of street car status or turn signals, lights, indicators, wipers, whatever. Man, is it convenient to wire everything because you sit there in one spot, and you can even take the harness. If you're slick, you take the harness out of the car, make it removable, and then go over to the bench and terminate everything, and it goes quick. That's the one thing I really noticed about wiring up the smart wire that I worked on. and I liked that.
Yeah, I've been wiring them all up on my fold-up tables and then taking them over to the car. You know, I pick a couple designated spots in the car that I measure from and grab all my measurements and then run, you know, I'll cut one harness, run that, and then that's my, what I call like my master length for that loom. And then do that throughout the whole car, which is really nice. And when you're done with it, like when I'm done with it on the table, it's like you pick this whole harness up. You're like, how am I going to fit this in this damn car? Yeah, but it's nice because when you do that and then you install it and you're just running the harness, you're fastening it, you're not terminating anything on the car like we used to. Like I used to really just wire the car from scratch in the car, and that was beating me up. I mean, that's a newbie, you know, quite a few years ago. I mean, that's a newbie mistake. You know what I'm saying, right?
No, we all have been there and lived there frequently. Why do we keep making mistakes like this?
But the PMU stuff is really going to the next level. I'm really looking forward to playing with the Haltech Nexus. I think that's a whole nother game changer. That's, you know, blending the two and being able to have the coil and injector power relays on board that are controlled by the ECU, not tying up extra stuff to control them. You know, little stuff like that in my world goes a long way with the whole package, you know, with making a clean package.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And we were talking about installation. I don't know. We could probably go down this. Most of the stuff I work with, you know, a lot of stuff we're doing, especially like we had Nick on last week from Imtron, and I work with Ace Performance out here in Tewksbury, who's a Imtron distributor, which is how I know Nick personally. In fact, I talked to Nick today. We talked about last week's podcast. He showed me stuff he was upset he didn't get to show. But 90% of our harnesses are all TEF, however you want to pronounce it. I'm sure I pronounce it wrong, but mil-spec based wiring.
TEF.
That stuff's not. Yeah, that stuff's not cheap. When you start eliminating, you know, all your switches back and forth and replacing that with a CAN wire and CAN data, that alone adds up. And then, you know, the amount of crimps you have to do, the connectors, and then, you know, every single one of those crimps is a failure point. And that's most common issues in wiring I see is failed crimps, improper crimps, or failed solder joints from breaking. So, you know, that's making sure you do it with the right tools. But, you know, the more that you do, the more likely I am sure you can have a guy that does this every day for his whole life, and, you know, shit happens. Like I had, you know, 2 crimps break last weekend on a harness that was perfect otherwise. And it was just, I went to look at him and I realized that, you know, it was in an odd position doing an infield crimp. So, you know, eliminating all that stuff, it's really not hard to make an argument for the money here. And, you know, for guys, you know, Troy, I don't know if this is something you've looked at. You know, RealWire offers this, but they do pre-set up and pre-wired PDMs where it's like those old painless harnesses, where it was a predefined length. They gave you some flying leads that this is your taillight, this is your brake light, blah, 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 where they ship you a PDM that's pre-programmed, pre-set up, pre-pinned out, and all you have to do is connect your ends. You know, instead of all these guys that are doing these real complicated busman panels and switch panels and sending all that out, I think we're going to see more and more of that. And I'm really welcoming it. I think it's better for the customer. It's easier to get them a better product. And it's easier for us to make, especially to adapt to different cars.
Yeah, I agree with that 110%. That's RealWire, man. That guy, he does some incredible stuff, and I'm not surprised he's doing it. That's a really nice option. I will definitely look into that. Anything that I can offer, you know, my clientele.
Yeah, that's
to give them the
Ryan's who we get the Morris Tech stuff through, and I've told a couple people about the Morris Tech stuff. Really good stuff. Their website it's terrible. They have some good data sheets out there. The software is there. There is no direct link if you go to morristech.au or .com or whatever their website is. you can't find the download link to their software. I had to find it by going to RealWire's website and finding his listing for it and his link to download the software. And the only manual is in the software. So as Jeff was mentioning, how do you decide on your PDM? Software is a huge part of it. And that's where some of it will get you more than other. The Morse Tech stuff, all of its logic is drop-down menus. So you say, hey, take this input. If this input is true or false or whatever, it's all drop-downs. There's no coding. There's no logic. That's where the PMU, the ECU master stuff has a lot of that stuff built in. But if you want to do something custom, you start writing code, and it's not hard. But, as soon as you put a little bit of code in front of some people, I get it. It's not their thing. I hate code. I understand enough because I need to, and I'll do it. But I know there's guys, same thing. It's hard enough to get a guy to wire something. So, if you don't want to code, go use the software and see what you like. AIM has their stuff. I know a lot of guys don't like AIM software. I really like it because I use it so data heavy in our road race and drift cars. But yeah, just go download the software. AEM they have a PDM. They announced it at PRI. It's only on their EV ECUs right now. I believe they said Q3 or so. They're going to release it as a standalone PDM system that'll work with. It's going to be a lot like their dashes. They're going to build in CAN bus for a bunch of other ECUs, and it's only an 8-channel. But I believe its cost is like $600 for an 8-channel PDM. So really great for, put one in the front to run your engine, put one in the back to run your heavy chassis stuff, or wherever all your high amperage stuff is, put one, near the ECU or one under the hood. That's the nice thing about this CAN bus stuff is you can split this stuff out. So now you can have, like in a rear radiator car, maybe we'll put one in the front to run the engine with just one battery cable from the alternator or something. And then we'll have one in the back by our fuel pumps, our radiators and stuff like that, right next to the battery. So now we've only got these really short, big battery cables run, and everything else is just a short run to the device, and then it can wire front to back so everything can talk to each other.
Yeah, that makes it super, super convenient for stuff like that. And the race, what is it? The Race Studio 3? Race Studio 3 software. I use that for my I only have the Strada dash in my car with the Haltech 2500. Mm-hmm. And so far, I mean, I agree. I like the Race Studio software. I don't think the AIM the software is that bad. And I'm not an IT guy. Like I'm not really a computer guy. In fact, I can't even get into these conversations with probably 98% of my clientele because they're all coming from MSD Power Grid. So I'm trying to explain, the fuel injection inputs and outputs to them, let alone configurability to this extent.
And that's how much of your time would you say is talking about a lot of what you do? That's a lot of everyone's like, oh, why should I buy this wiring harness or that wiring harness? Dahlquist talked about this with the support from PSI. That's when you're talking to guys like Troy and stuff like that. That's the wiring is one of you get the solid wiring harness. That's we try to do the same thing for our customers. That we want the wiring harness to work, but a lot of it's everything else, educating the customer so they can use everything they're buying properly. And that's, kind of a double-edged sword because like you said, sometimes you want to teach them this other stuff, but, if just explaining how a fuel injector works becomes a chore, then making it more complicated sometimes is going to give us more headaches. But I think that's where some of these systems are going to be nice is being able to do a turnkey option that's just, hey, plug this in, do these small things. You're done.
Right. And that's personal, like, that's personal time on our part, taking the time to educate ourselves, like I got to read up on all this stuff. You have to read up on everything you're doing to be able to explain it to your customer. So there's a lot of time of just, education.
Yeah. When you're wondering why these harnesses cost this much and, I'm sure how much time you have in a harness
into it. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I think that's 944 harness I'm building right now, which is very basic. And the layout was already done. All I did was modify the wiring schedule a little bit and build the harness. And we're going to have 20-something-ish hours into building this harness alone. And that doesn't include all of the other setup that's coming with everything that's already pre-done because, like Troy said, we've spent how much time learning and staying on top of this stuff that changes every 6 months.
Well, and and I populate everything too. So like, you take an ECU if there's that, or PMU, and if there's any extra inputs, outputs, they all go to Deutsch connectors. So that way, I'm not a huge fan of terminal strips have their place, but I'm more of a fan of a sealed Deutsch connector because most customers should not be playing around with anything anyway.
Right.
But it makes it easier for us, when our customer calls and says, hey, I want to add this sensor. Well, okay. We can look back on our notes and say, well, we have a 6-pin DTM connector there. So I'll populate the 5-volt sensor ground and signal wire on one hand.
Sure. Right.
Ship it.
Yeah.
And maybe something we could, I could share there. One thing that, I haven't realized that, a lot of guys don't think of is doing like a wiring schedule. Excel spreadsheet with a pinout of, okay, these are all of my connections. These are the pins of the ECU, and it goes to these places, and it'll say, hey, it goes from pin A1 on the ECU to this injector or whatever, and the power splice is at this point at this DT, and vice for whatever. You've got full documentation of that, and in doing that stuff, I could probably post a couple wiring schedules up for guys that want to see, what.
Yeah.
Planning these. I know I posted some pictures of those, but yeah, I'm with you. I hate terminal strips. If I'm doing expansion or anything like that, it's a DT. Trying to get splices in a junction where I can strain relief them, and minimal number of splices because I don't want to run that wire all the way back through the harness when all of my sensor grounds are going to go down to 2 or 3 pins anyway. And there are, for guys that do want a junction, there's a lot of junction posts and stuff like that, but there's junction posts that are a single terminal that you can put a big ring terminal with a big power ground on, and it terminates to a DT12 or a Deutsch connector that now you've got one stud coming in that outputs power in all 12 of those pins. So that becomes a nice common splice point for people that are like, I want to just be able to pull power for a bunch of other stuff. Which, I could see on chassis stuff on guys that are adding stuff and, they're still running a bunch of old mechanical gauges or individual gauges and lots of little things that need power because you don't want to have, 40 splices in a car too, because especially if you're a guy doing.
Sorry, Troy, I just put that picture up. I guess that thing was waiting for me for a while. I didn't recognize or realize, but it's streaming out right now. The ECU, PMU 16, the ECU Masters.
It's all good, Scott. I sent you that picture when we were talking about the physical size of it.
Yeah.
Just for reference, as compared to a normal relay fuse board setup, you're able to get it all on that small panel. And then what I like to do is, if you're looking at the picture, you see the 2 ground 8-point posts. So I don't terminate my grounds onto the chassis of a car. I take all my harnesses, they all come back here. So the power goes into the PMU and the ground's right there to terminate. It keeps the harness clean, it keeps the chassis clean, and it keeps our diagnostics clean.
Right.
And it keeps our battery grounds clean too. There's few different ways, and we've talked about this before, Scott. In fact, we always go back and forth on certain techniques. So to be able to keep all that right there, and then that goes directly to the battery, is kind of a fail-safe for me, a way of doing things to start looking into things if you do run into problems. Is that how you guys do your trophy trucks and stuff?
Yeah, so the trophy truck has a lot of that. Depends what you're doing. I'm a fan of it's the same idea, and I'm trying to find a link to one. And I just had it open earlier today, and of course now that I want it, I can't find it. They make so it's like this. So it's got a single post, but instead of the ring terminals, it outputs to like an 8 or a 12 pin Deutsch connector. So same idea. You can have everything, but it lets me use a sealed Deutsch connector instead of having to cramp all these individual ring terminals and take them off. So for serviceability, it's huge because when I disconnect that, I don't have all these ring terminals. Or what you can do is make all these ring terminals and go to a Deutsch, but just skip that and go straight to a DT or DTP connector that connects to a stud instead. So all that just plugs in. So it's the same idea, but straight to a connector and no ring terminals.
Yeah, I like that. I think I've seen, is that, that's the sealed bus bar, like sealedbusbar.com.
Yeah,
I think that's a bunch of those.
There's a bunch of stuff there. And
there's a data panel too. I think that's the name of it, data panel, where we can use it for 5-volt and sensor ground, and it's it's got two power studs and Deutsch connectors. Cost, sometimes on those bus bars, but normally in my world, I don't really worry about cost. No offense to any of my customers, but
yeah, I'm with you there.
I try to find the happy medium. I mean, If you go through my pictures, I'm not full mil spec. I'm not that level. I have extreme respect for the guys that can do the Tefsel. I use a lot of Tefsel wire, but they do the concentric twisting and you got.
I'm just gonna say it. I hate that. I know they're probably gonna talk snooty
at
me, but I hate concentric
twist. I've done
twist.
Concentric twist. I'll do it on the right stuff.
I think it sucks.
Yeah, it became this vogue thing to do because it's the motorsports mil spec, blah 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 blah. Even F1 doesn't concentric twist most of their stuff. They parallel twist it because they're not adding filler wire to get everything absolutely perfect. I did military wiring for years. That's one reason I hate it, because everything there is done that way for good reason on aircraft and stuff like that. But on motorsports, there's lots of other ways to get very similar benefits without that much work. So, I will do some parallel twists to keep some bundles tight. And I like to bundle everything nice. I'll still use lacing cord to make a nice bundle and follow some of the same ideas. And we do build some Raychem harnesses that are a mil spec ish harness. Yeah, they're not concentric twisted, but once they're sealed up, they're plenty flexible. There was almost zero benefit we would get from concentric twisting other than the Instagram cool points, I guess. But I guess I'm over that. So I'm on the same boat there. It's cool, and there's times when it's needed, but guys that are like, I know there was a guy that's all I build. If my customer doesn't want concentric twist, screw him. I don't want him as a customer. I was like, all right. I mean, I'm not.
So the concentric twist is meant for machine equipment with like robot arms and stuff that move a lot. I don't get the application
it's
for
strain relay, for making bends, and for vibration protection and stuff like that, where there's a lot of movement or expansion in aircraft and stuff like that. That's the problem there. There's plenty of ways to get that in a race car. It's really the problem is it's a problem with a lot of stuff. It's people that learned the method and the reason the method was done, but didn't think about the reason or the science behind it. So, can we do strain relief? Can we seal these things up? Can we make them flexible and vibration resistant in other ways? Absolutely. That take less material, less time, way less time. I'm not saying I don't care about cost, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to build a super cheap harness that's garbage quality. I want to use nice stuff, but I also don't want to waste someone's money giving them something that adds no benefit. I would rather I want that money, and I'll find somewhere else to spend that money for them. But I would rather get them more for the same amount of money. I'm still going to spend all their money. And that's only because I already spent all of mine and I need more. So.
But we're going to give them more at the end of the day.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Our customer's going to get more because they don't fully understand that process, and they don't really need to. But when you do the build up and you're like, yeah, I got 300 hours in this perfect harness, but you can't see it because it's all shrink tubed up. At the end of the day, I really don't think anybody gives a shit.
Right. That was
true.
Joke I had before the podcast started was, wiring it's terrible. I started with what looked like just this mess in my table and my workbench this morning, and by the end of the day, all it looked like is that I cleaned some stuff up, and then I covered it all so you can't see all the work I did. So you look at this and you're like, oh, this is just this is the cable, and oh yeah, there's 30 hours into this. So.
Right. It is so time consuming. It is unreal. So like and with the variety, I'll say, of cars I do, somehow I ended up getting into a large variety, anything from street to Pro Mod X 275, blah, blah, blah. On the drag racing street strip side of things, I haven't done any trophy trucks. I love them. I'm friends with all kinds of people on Instagram and everything, and the wiring and everything is, I mean, that's the environments that you guys race in and everything is intriguing to me.
Yes, this is actually my first trophy truck. I got involved with their drift side, and it just kind of went from there. And I wasn't going to say no to working on the trophy truck. So
no, yeah, absolutely.
I will say that the biggest problem, there's nothing to sit or lay on when they're stripped down. They suck. They suck to work on. They're just a pain. Like the wiring guys are normally, there's this joke. Anyone that's met Ryan from RACEWIRES, he's actually shorter than I am, which is hard to do. But there's always this joke about how small a bunch of wiring guys are, and it's because we're always under a dash laying on the floor. Wiring the trophy truck there was some pain involved. So it was just sitting on some 1 3/4 bar, and you can't really lay on anything. You're crawling around tubes to get to anything. So it's a pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Crawling. I mean, that's the other part. That was the main motivation to build all my harnesses out on the bench. I'm 6'2", 240, and I have pretty long arms, so I'm able to wire a car kind of outside of the car.
See, yeah, that's yeah.
Leaning in.
We have a step stool in the shop for me to use. I'm not even joking, so I can reach stuff in the middle of an engine bay.
Oh, I get it, man. My wife's 5 foot. I got step stools all over the house, homie. That's funny.
So what else we got to cover? Anything? Any other questions coming across? Anybody on the YouTube chat?
Guys that aren't wiring guys all the time, what are the questions you're afraid to ask all the time? Because I get a lot of guys that don't want to talk about wiring. It's like, I don't know anything. I'm going to look dumb.
Everybody's afraid of wiring. They're afraid of what everybody else will think of their wiring.
I have a great one that I think a lot of guys don't know the best way to do this. So how do you like to do when you're laying out a new harness, right? Like I know there's a picture online right now. You posted earlier working on a harness, right? You've got it all laid out on the table and it's all marked out and everything's got lengths. What do you do when you're laying something out there and you're figuring out those lengths? Do you use a piece of rope? Do you use other pieces of wire? What is your method of figuring out lengths to go from where that split is over to the first piece?
I have a probably like 15 or 20 foot piece of 18 gauge scrap wire with a couple pieces of painter's tape attached to it that I could slide on the wire. I know this sounds really hokey, but that's how I can move that tape to my desired length. So I just go into the car with the same piece of wire and I just measure the whole harness with one piece of wire.
Yeah, I mean, similar thing. It's really a bunch of, I use stuff like that. Sometimes just a straight tape measure. It depends on what I'm laying up. I do it junction to junction. So, I'll figure out, hey, the ECU is going to be here. It goes to the firewall and I'll get that measurement done. And when I'm sketching it and Scott, I don't know if I've got, I can send you some of my sketches and how they're laid out. So figure out where all that junction is and measure that. And then that gives you can break it down section by section. So I'm not trying to draw out this big harness at once that I know that, hey, my ECU to firewall is this long. Then, from the firewall, maybe these sensors will come out, the boost solenoid stuff, that O2 sensor stuff that comes right off of that first branch, usually right by the firewall, fuel pressure sensors, maybe if you've got it on your regulator. Those branches come off and I'll draw those branches from the junction and I'll measure just from the junction to where it goes. Then I'll measure the next junction. So that way, yeah. And then I put everything in Excel. I make my junction links. So the nice thing is I decide, hey, I want to move the ECU X inches, or hey, I want to move this junction over for strain relief. All I do is change that, and I just in Excel I go through and I say, hey, this this routing goes through these junctions, and it automatically adds that up to make my my wire length. So if I know, ECU to junction 1 is 40 inches, junction 1 to junction 2 is 12 inches, and then I've got, say, all my injectors come off junction 2 and they're whatever. So now I know that's junction ECU to junction 1 plus junction 1 to junction 2 plus my actual measured length. So that way I'm usually able to pick a very firm location, back of valve cover, or I'll pick where I'm going to tie my harness down, and I'll use that as my junction reference, and I'll measure from that. And usually from there, it's really straightforward. You're not bending a wire around 30 curves or something like that.
Nah.
So
that's exactly what I do. I pick a couple hard spots all over the car and use those as my designation. I think where a lot of people go wrong, honestly, if you're wiring your own car in your garage, because we've all started there. The number one thing is the actual planning. Like, I have 4 huge whiteboards in my shop, and I'll write down, okay, everything from the firewall front is the front of the car. What is all in the front of the car? So we separated chassis, water pump, fan, lights, all that, line lock. That all goes on one separate list. EFI stuff stays separate, just for simplicity. And then you make your list of all your sensors and everything. Once you visually look at that list, I think if a lot more people would do that, they'd be able to see what the final product is going to turn
Absolutely.
out. I think it would help them a lot more, because it's definitely helped me. And then, like, in the office, I call the inside of the car the office. So everything that's in the office, and then the tail section of the car, by separating it like that, it's easier to pinpoint the junctions that you were talking about. Firewall, bulkhead connectors, all that stuff. But just separating it like that and writing it down is huge, because there's so many incrementals. Like, you take switch 12 volts. I mean, talk about junctions. You could have 12 ECUs switch 12 volts on one harness on one car. Boost, solenoid 12 volt, this 12 volt, everything switched, all your switches. So to be able to write it all down, add up all that kind of stuff is huge.
yeah, and that's everyone's got their own way of doing it. Scott, I just sent you some Scott Clark. I just sent you some sketches of how I do it, and that's where I start. I just start to lay it out. And I figure out, I have a list. Yeah, I just start a list, whether it's a whiteboard. I actually like to use, if I'm working on the car, I use a chalk marker or a dial-in marker, something like that. And I'll just write right on the windshield, because it's right there. And it's big, I can see it. And then it cleans off. Just make a list of that stuff, start sketching that out. And then I'm background being an engineer and stuff like that. That's always a joke. 90% of engineering is making spreadsheets and then turning that spreadsheet into a PowerPoint presentation. So I really like Excel.
I've got your picture up right now, your first image.
Okay, cool.
Not to scale.
Yes.
There's
That's
a
pretty
balance
badass.
there
Yep.
too,
The branch diagram. Sorry, carry on.
Right there.
Yeah, go ahead, Troy.
The balance of spreadsheets and drawing it out. I don't draw it out too much. Once I write it down and I can see it, and I have a front harness and I can visualize the breakouts, like you were saying, run one 5 volt and run one sensor ground out to a breakout that's going to pick up 5 different sensors, so you don't have to run 5 different 5 volts, 5 different sensor grounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think
I can visualize. I visualize all that in my head. I really don't.
Yeah, and
I'm not much of an artist.
Neither am I, but I do have a CAD and a drafter background. So
cheater! You're a cheater. You can't do that,
right?
And that's why I'm glad that we have a very different approach on that, because that's always my point to people is I don't care as long as it works for you and you have a plan. For me, the spreadsheet works because a lot of times we're using this to we're doing a lot of repeat stuff. So we're sending this stuff to customers as well to do their documentation or to turn into customer documentation. And in our case, we have to store this stuff because like this 944 harness, there's, anywhere from 3 to 5 of these a year that they build, and we want to be able to rebuild them the same every time. As Nick was alluding to last week, there's a lot of Imtron BMW stuff, and we wind up working on a lot of that. We're working on building actually a production line of Pantera harnesses, for the Imtron, I think is a plan. So that's where, if you're planning on doing this a lot, the documentation is more worth it. If you're just doing one, and if you're good, like you said, I can visualize it, but when I'm laying it out on a board, having the drawing really helps me to just lay out how I want the wires to route. And for me, it feels like it makes it easier to lay it out on the board and to transfer that. Everyone's, whether some people are visual, some people have to be hands-on and have to, feel it and touch it. So that's a really good point that we both disagree on. We have different ways of doing it, and both works.
Oh, no. There's no disagreeing. I don't get me wrong. I definitely draw some things out, especially if signals are getting split and things get a little more complicated. I'll draw them out. And certain breakouts and stuff. So there's no disagreement. I think disagreement
was the wrong word.
I guess I just skip that step because I also kind of think time is money.
Absolutely.
So the less time I spend drawing, and the more time I'm on, because the stuff takes so much time as is. So over the years I try to, and I don't know if it's good or not, but I knock certain elements out of the program, like drawing everything out, and that sort of thing, just to try to save some time. But on my end, since I'm the only one doing the cars, I have a helper that comes in, a few evenings a week to help me. But since I'm the main guy, I don't have to detail it or document it like that. So somebody else is coming in to work on the project. As long as I have the documentation, I'm able to give it to the customer, and we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's everyone's like, oh, is this the right way? It's like, does it work for you? Can you do a planned harness? And if you have to change it later, do you have enough understanding to go back in? Did you plan ahead of time? Is it flexible, or are you gonna, when there's a problem, you need to expand it? You're gonna have a problem. And as long as you can do that, whatever way works, if that's, scratching in the dirt or on your garage wall, whatever works.
Yeah. Well, no, your documentation looks great. I'm always down for other people's approach to incorporate it into my program to make what I got going, just a little bit better with guys that have a lot more, I don't want to say more experience, but maybe different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the cool thing about this is everyone's got their own kind of way of doing stuff. And every time you work with someone that does it, you learn something else that you integrate into the way you do something in the future. And that's what I love. It's, my wife makes fun of me and calls me a nerd about this stuff. And, it is kind of dumb to be excited about wires, but, it's really cool to see the different ways to do stuff and, to take that and integrate it in what you do. We've got.
I think we kind of get thrown under the bus. Nobody cares about the wiring guy.
That's the problem. When you're the wiring and the tuning guy, it's always the tuning guy's fault, and the tuner blames the wiring guy. So who the fuck do I blame?
Right.
Yeah.
The wiring guy gets crapped on. I saw that this week.
I just blame the mechanic. It's clearly his fault.
Yeah, I don't think you can be a wiring guy and not love it. It's like one of those things you have to be into, or you just.
Oh yeah. The guys at the shop came over today. I was like, "Do you love doing this?" And they were just like confused. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's nice. But there's actually a couple questions that are some good stuff to get to, and I'd be curious to get your input on this, Troy, too. There's a couple here. someone asked about vendors. We can get to that at the end because I have a feeling that Troy is probably a guy you can get some stuff from too. But one that I get asked a lot: power and ground wire, what to use, welding cable or no. Don't use audio cable. That's my first thing.
For sure.
Yeah,
I religiously stick with welding cable.
Okay.
Aluminum cable, you gotta double the gauge for the same rating, the same current for the wire, for it to be up to par.
Yeah.
So you do save some weight, but at the end of the day, you're still putting a thicker cable in.
Right.
But mostly, go ahead.
I say there are some good, and we can talk about this. We talk about suppliers. There are some good, Race Spec Online. A few of the other guys do have, 2 and 4 gauge and 0 gauge if you want it. Battery cable as well. It is pricier, but that's what we've been working with a lot. And I've always been a welding cable guy on my own stuff, but doing more production stuff, and it's really not that expensive or hard to source some of the actual battery cable. But
so what cable are you referring to?
So the stuff we're using from Race Spec here, I'll actually link this to guys that are asking about.
And Brian, while you're doing that, if you can, what is the Race Spec cable at those sizes versus welding cable? Because I'll admit I'm a welding cable guy too.
Yeah, so it's really what Troy was kind of alluding to is the size on a lot of it, and that's where when you talk about all your mil spec cable, so your Tefzel wire, your 32 strand wire. If you compare an 18 gauge Tefzel wire to like an 18 gauge TXL or GXL wire, they're physically smaller, and they can actually take more amperage. They're actually a tinned wire, a coated wire, I believe, is the correct term. And that really helps how much it can take. And there's more strands. There's more strands to it than even than a bigger wire. So it just helps it carry more amperage for a smaller size. In a lot of cases too, it's a double layer insulation on some of the battery cable I'm talking about that now I can't find because I'm not sure we got it from Race Spec. I'd have to double check that. It may not be on their website. That might be the problem I'm running into.
You could generally use like 18 gauge Tefzel to take the place of 16 gauge TXL.
Absolutely.
I used to use a lot of TXL, and I still do. TXL is great, but Tefzel is so much nice to work with. And the strands, it's double the amount of strands, and it is tinned. The sheathing is I think, it's a thinner but more robust, if that makes sense. And it's more flexible.
It's definitely it's tougher. It is harder to strip. So those of you that have a bunch of knives, the automatic strip tools that you're doing all your and your normal stuff, if you start doing Tefzel on it, you are going to eat through your crimp tool. Don't say, "Oh, want to get some." Fine. Yeah, it's only a matter of time before you destroy it. Ask me how I know.
Grab a couple ideal strip masters and call it a day.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff out there, and we could talk about tools and stuff like that. I just posted a link to Race Spec. Maybe I'll put together a list of links for all the places we use. Race Spec.
The Tefzel crimps nicer too, doesn't it? I mean, I think so.
I think so, but I think a lot of people that's going to vary by what you use for a crimp tool.
That's true.
I'm all for, there's a bunch of expensive crimp tools out there, and I'm sure that question is one on people's minds. There's a $170 crimp tool from Tool Aid, I think. You can get on Amazon and eBay. It comes with 3 size Deutsch closed crimp connectors, an open Metra Pack, and an open Deutsch connector. And to be honest, it works great for field stuff and most of the other stuff.
I use a $30 Deutsch connector tool from Tool Aid.
Yeah. So the kit I'm talking about is all of those tools in one kit, plus their open crimp stuff and all the deepening tools for $150.
And it is fantastic. I compared the Tool Aid crimp for now I'm talking about solid terminal, DT, DTM, pin terminals, but with, against the Daniels crimpers, and they're all 8 crimped, dual crimp on each side of the terminal, if I could say that. You know what I'm saying? So there's 8 individual indentations.
Yeah.
Yep. That's all that. Yeah. If anyone's looking for they want to get in Deutsch stuff, but they can't buy the crimp tool, it's a Tool Aid is the name of the company. And that the kit I'm talking about, it's just a multi-piece Deutsch connector. I do a lot of DTPs and other size. If you're doing mainly just 18 gauge stuff, the $30 tool works great. Just make sure there's a lot of knockoffs of it. Make sure it's so cheap. Get the Tool Aid branded version. Don't go buy this looks like it, because a lot of them are a single row and you wind up with those crimps pulling out a lot. And like I said, there's a common failure I see in the guys that are especially getting into this is just failed crimps. That's where I'll see a harness fail.
Brad Nagel turned me on to the Sargent crimp tools.
Yeah, so for they make a bunch of nice stuff too, especially for your splices and in your open barrel and closed barrel splicing.
They also have the 0.64 millimeter tool for the micro or whatever the 0.64 millimeter Metro Pack that is used in the GM ECU.
Yeah, that Tool Aid kit comes with that crimp tool. It's pretty much 90% of stuff you're going to crimp by that, plus a good closed barrel crimper, and that's going to cover 90% of what you need. This is going through.
I use I think it's
I have that on screen, by the way, the
Ozan.
Tool Aid kit. It's on screen right now. Carry on.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm actually catching up. Look at me.
Hey guys, while we're talking about crimps and crimp tools and all of that, Kiwi Boosted Garage posted a question a minute ago about, for splitting a signal wire, should I crimp or solder? And if I solder, are there certain types of solder to use? And I'm circling back to that one because we kind of blew by the crimp versus solder debate.
I think because we all just yelled crimp.
I know. We all did yell crimp, but I think it's worth going back to the audience to explain why we're all in the crimp camp.
When I split signals, like RaceSpec, they sell those dual barrel. This is just one example, but you can fit, so it'll be 18 gauge on one side and 16 or 14 coming out, or 18, 22 on one side. So the hole's smaller on one side and bigger on the other, so you can put one wire in one end and then 5 out the other.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a parallel splice, you can get those small ones, which Joel has as well. That you could.
You just shove a bunch of wires in and then go whatever direction. One other little trick for guys that are doing a lot of just inline splicing instead of using like the closed barrel splicers or something like that. BMW, it's a service tool or a service part for them. It's called an airbag. It's an airbag crimp connector. They're a zero resistance crimp, and it's got just 2 open end crimps on either side for connecting wires. Those, they crimp really nice. You never have a signal problem with them. We use it a lot for when you're just connecting. It's usually anything over an 18, maybe 16 gauge wire is a problem. But for doing like a repair on a harness, those are really nice. But yeah, as far as the crimp versus solder, the reason I don't like solder and most guys are anti-solder is that it basically wicks up the wire, and it causes it's a hard connection. It causes the wire to be brittle, and they crack. Vibration, heat changes, all stuff under the hood of a car. That's the reasoning for it. There's a whole big argument here. Everyone's like, "Oh, I've soldered a million times. I've never had a problem." But guys have also run pop bang negative 30-degree overrun tunes and never blown an engine. So that doesn't make it right.
It doesn't make it right. Yeah.
If you are going to solder, there are ways to do it. You have to use, make sure it's a sealed connection so no moisture gets to it. Provide strain relief so you're not pulling on that solder joint and you're eliminating it from as much vibration as possible. But at the end of the day, you've made a compromise. And, if you understand it and, that's all you can do, because, people can do a crappy crimp too because they're using the wrong tool. And, an improper crimp is just as bad as I'd rather see a good solder joint than a crappy crimp if all you're ever going to do is a crappy crimp. I'd prefer to see you do a good crimp, but that's the reasoning behind it.
Something to tell people to look at that will give them a good idea of a good solder joint. Look up the NASA cable solder, what they do for it. It's basically a special lineman splice with solder, and it's probably the strongest solder joint you're going to make, with the exception that wherever that solder wicks up to is the brittle part of that. The wire itself will never come apart in the middle where it's going to do. It'll come apart and break out the outskirts where it's wicked underneath the jacketing.
That cost, their soldering irons cost $1,000 or $2,000.
There you go.
That they use too, because we use them in the. I used to do a lot of circuit board work for R&D engineering stuff, and we had. They were smart. You put a tip in, and the temperature was you could set the temperature, or the temperature was related to the tip, and it would maintain exactly that temperature within some stupid tolerance.
Within 0.1
there's a lot of other stuff to control the wicking, to pull heat out of it. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. It's cheaper and easier to do a proper crimp than to do a proper solder. And there's places for both, but if you ask me why, am I going to tell you that, oh my God, you're an absolutely terrible person for soldering? No. But if you leave me my toolbox and I have my crimp stuff and I have any other option, I'm going to crimp it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Nobody has ever been able to tell me why soldering is better. I can tell you that crimping is faster. I mean, hey, solder works. Soldering is fantastic for circuit boards. I think that's probably where it belongs. If you're going to crawl over a race car with a soldering iron, I really don't.
We've done some field repairs where they got soldered because that was, all we had. I couldn't get to with a crimp tool. There's places where I just
crimper with that.
But and even time when we've soldered it on a field repair, it was I couldn't get a crimp tool in that part of the car. We repaired it in the car. I was under the car with a soldering iron. I tried to crimp it. I couldn't do it. And then as soon as we got to a point where we had time to pull that whole harness on, it came off, and we repaired it the way I wanted for long term. So
there you go.
I've been under the car with a cigar lighter, so we've all done shit I don't want to admit to.
I mean, we've all sent a car that has maybe questionable oil pressure or coolant temperature, and we also none of us would have been surprised if that caused an issue and failed either. And the biggest thing is we didn't leave it that way permanently.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't Harley Davidson used to solder all their stuff, and then they ran into a bunch of problems, and now everything's crimped? Years ago on their
production in 1924,
bikes.
probably.
That's a really good I don't know.
I have no idea.
Well, maybe
I go the other way.
Maybe there was acid in the oil, and the oil was dripping on the solder joint and it ate through the solder.
Nah, they don't leak long enough to do that. They empty out.
I suppose
no
they run out of oil first.
Yeah, my motorcycles just catch on fire for no reason. So, well, actually, Ducati does stuff like using the connector on the alternator on my wife's 748 is notorious for just not being able to take the amperage they knew the alternator put out because it's an alternator, and they'll just randomly melt. So that's cool. So OEMs get this wrong a lot too, but let me take a look. I know we got
so there was a related question, Brian and Troy. This was from Dakota Dale. Where are we drawing the line with audio cable? I do a lot of car audio, so for power and ground I use my audio cable. It's all OFC, which I used to remember what OFC
oxygen-free cable.
There we go. So hopefully that's good enough. What's the issue with audio cable versus, welding cable for power, or the other cable you were talking about?
You could directly compare the strands of a welding cable to audio cable and tell right away.
Yeah. I was going to say, hold the two next to each other.
Hold the two next to each other, and the strands from the audio cable is super thin, like super thin. I think it's probably 10 times the amount of strands, which you would think would be better, but I can't say it's not. I mean,
what kind of test
the audio stuff. What kind of test you're
Okay. Yeah,
The audio stuff
isn't
isn't all
as-
up to vibration much.
Yeah. To be honest, even on audio stuff, I prefer to use if it's going in a car, I prefer to use actual auto spec wiring as much as possible. It's a lot less sensitive to some stuff, especially when you're doing, multiple batteries and big capacitors and doing stuff specifically to, keep that amp running. But even on audio stuff, I prefer to see battery cable. To be honest, would you ever really notice a difference, maybe in failure rate and stuff like that? The battery cable and welding cable, I think, still works better. And I do see some really high end audio guys still use welding cable because they need that much amperage. If it's just audio stuff, it's more expensive to do it the other way. You realize what you're trading off, and is maybe your amp power dropping or varying, how many ever watts going to, or how many ever amps really going to affect that. Now, what you never want to see is your EFI system do that, because that can cause an issue with an engine or something like that. So again, just think about what your trade-off there, and maybe that's okay for your audio system. That extra money for the improvement worth it? Again, you can spend all your money, but what are you getting for your money?
The thing that I've noticed is when you get the, I don't know, I'll call it auto parts store auto cable, is that it's a lot of plastic. It's usually red for God knows what reason, but there's not a lot of gauge inside the plastic.
Yeah,
so it looks really big and fat, but you get down into it and it's like 8. Or
there's not a lot of strand, and I do want to, before we get too far away, Killswitch posted, and this is a good one, talking about crimps. We're not talking about those crappy little plastic things you get from AutoZone. We're talking about closed barrel crimps from Race Spec Online. There's a bunch of stuff we can post out there. The BMW airbag crimp connectors, proper motorsport crimps. To be honest, this kind of segues into, I think, HP Farm's question about some of the Chinese stuff. There's a closed barrel crimp tool or crimp connector that I use from Amazon on a lot of stuff. It may not necessarily go into a race car, but we've used them on a bunch of field repairs. That is probably a China-based crimp connector, but I've had really, really good luck with them. I've never had them fail. They're a seamless crimp connector. I'm trying to find a link to it right now. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, and that gets back into it. I think HP Farm asked that of, some of the China stuff, some of the cheaper stuff out there versus, the US sourced motorsports grade stuff, in what's okay and what's not. Like I said, that those tool aid crimp tools, they're a China crimp tool. But that's where I said too, is understanding the problem with the China stuff. There is some good stuff that comes there. There's a lot of crappy stuff that also failed QA. That's the problem there. So it's, again, understanding what are you saving on a connector. At the end of the day, what are you saving? A couple bucks. That connector fails, a lot of bad stuff could happen. Some of the tools, again, it's using the resources out there and what works and what doesn't. I know those tool aid China sourced crimp tools work really well. A lot of for basic stuff, not everything needs to be Raychem DR25 heat shrink.
I've got that image up that Troy just sent. Troy, you got a picture of some Kleins and some different crimps, it looks like.
Yep. Yeah, these crimp tools exactly are, what we use. Here we go.
There we go. Okay, I got them stretched out right.
Yeah, I'll post. No, that's not either.
Yep. Okay. Had a good 10 seconds of it. All right, carry on.
Yeah, but actually, yeah, these here are what I use. McMaster-Carr carries these. I just posted a link to Amazon in the YouTube chat section. The ones that Troy has in the picture here are really, really nice versions.
I don't think it's letting me post links. I don't see it. Sorry, hold on. Why don't you send it to me? Do you have something I can put up?
I'm seeing it. Or at least I think I'm seeing the right one.
Yep. Yeah, so
What is it
I
not
use those a
display?
lot. It's a good, and like again, I would go with a more solid source crimp on a race car just because the failure is so much bigger in something where you're going to seal up in Raychem or something like that. But these get used a lot in just day to day repair work and stuff like that, and um, they're an Amazon China source tool, and I've gotten some bad versions of these too that guys have used and bought. So again, when you're buying these, be careful of the source, and that's where finding a consistent source. I source a lot of stuff from China, but I also spent 10 years of my life working as an engineer, working with Chinese manufacturers and understanding what it takes to get a good part from them. So that's really difficult. It could be a lot of work. You're going to get some crappy stuff. And if you're going to use the China stuff, be aware that you may be throwing some stuff away and don't be afraid don't use a crappy part. And that's where, I hate to be that guy because I hate the people that do that. But yeah, making sure you're getting consistent stuff, ordering through a source. That's part of where Amazon is nice. They give you a way to kind of track that. But same thing for heat shrink. There's a bunch of adhesive line heat shrink that you can get from Amazon that, I wish everyone was out there using DR25 and ATUM and all the really nice professional heat shrink. But you know what, when you're wiring in a couple gauges or something like that, I can't go say, hey, go spend $100 on heat shrink when the adhesive line stuff you can get from Amazon. Again, find a good source, but there's good stuff out there. Make sure, understand what you're getting, dual wall heat shrink and what it shrinks down to and how well it is. And it's a little bit of a learning process. But enough of this stuff is cheap enough and accessible enough that again, find a project and work on it slowly, teach yourself and figure out where you can get stuff that works. Now, when you're doing stuff like what they're showing here that Troy is doing, if you're going to do, 2000 horsepower car and you're going to boot all the connectors, that's where you go to a guy like you go to RaceSpec, you go to John at RaceSpec or one of those guys, and you get, DR25 Raychem boots. Because again, now this is a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 harness. So it is saving the, $100 because you got the China boots that may or may not worth it. So again, weighing the pros and cons in your design there, like anything else you're doing.
On the heat shrink top, there are along with multiple types. You can get stuff you can print on. You can get stuff that shrinks to different sizes. So there's some that's like a 3-to-1 shrink rate. There's some that's 5. There's some that's even 7. So if you have a connector and you forgot and you want to put it over the end and do a big bundle of stuff, you can buy 7-to-1 heat shrink. It's a lot more expensive because it has to shrink so far down, but you can get it if you forgot to put it on a connector, so you don't have to unpin every single pin in a multi-pin to be able to slip it over. The other thing you can do is something like I do. I'll do just a plain white heat shrink as my label, and because I'm kind of cheap, I write on it with a little fine point Sharpie. And when you heat shrink that, the Sharpie sinks into that label, and it doesn't come off after that. So you can kind of cheat on it to save a few cents here and there if you really have to.
Yeah, there's some cheap Dymo printers out there that are really well. The Dymo Rhino, I think, is a good one. That's what I was using today.
I've got
it's like $150.
Yep.
There's some cheaper ones too, but Scott, you mentioned the writing on it. There's actually there's a bunch of companies that make wraparound cable labels that you can print in a LaserJet. Most of them are LaserJet. If you're using an inkjet, it's a little bit harder. But if you have access to a LaserJet, that's how I do all of the cables we build in house. That they're adapter cables. I'm not going to print and heat shrink a label on every single one. I just bulk print labels that I wrap around and then throw some clear heat shrink over just to make sure they don't come off and they stay on a little bit nicer. But I've done a bunch of harnesses.
Clear heat shrink is definitely your friend with labels.
Yeah. So I think it's 200 sheets for like $20 or $30 for the labels. And that's it. I order them in 200 to 300 sheets. If you're not doing a bunch, you're looking at $10 for a bunch of labels or less. I think you can even less than that. So
I do my labels on the cheap. I use a regular Brother label maker that has the tape cartridge.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Print the labels, and then I use TechFlex, clear super clear shrink, which is real budget friendly. Waytech, back to those closed barrel connectors. Waytech is a great source for those as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, someone was asking about sources. I think that's, if we want to take a second, I keep mentioning Race Spec, and it's really good for straight motorsport stuff. It's not the cheapest. I'd say Waytech and WireCare are two of my favorite for like a budget. Just go here, everything's there. You can get a lot of that stuff from McMaster-Carr too, but the way Waytech and WireCare puts it to you is it's easy to find. That's the problem with the MasterCard. You can dig for hours and not find what you need.
You can find stuff on like Mouser and DigiKey too, but it's the same thing. You can dig for hours and hours before you find it, just because there's so much inventory.
Yeah. Once you start to do a lot and you find out the part numbers you're working on, that's when you start going to Mouser and DigiKey. Especially, and that's the one downside of Waytech. I'll say most of their stuff's not too bad. They do have minimum order quantities for some of their connectors, but it tends to be reasonable. It's like 3 or 5 connectors. It's not 50.
Right.
Yeah, I think those are.
There was one other question that was here, which I thought was a good one, and it was from, I guess it's Alex from St. Louis, who is also Momo F330SP. That's what I don't like about those crazy usernames, which was, is there a book on this subject? And I was going to suggest the Power and Grounds webinar from RealTuners. And Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about that and then talk about classes, and we'll wrap up the evening?
Yeah, we need to wind us down here. So if you go to RealTuners.com, you can click on online webinars, and I think, I see people were actually watching them today. So anyway, long story short, there's an online webinar for Power and Grounds that you can watch. And what is it, $15, something like that, or you can get them all for $55. But it's pretty handy, at least on a way that we like to lay out the power and the grounds in the car. It's not really a lot of discussion about what type of wire to use, just some pretty basic coverage there. But that being said, we still get a lot of good positive feedback from that. Worth checking out the Power and Grounds webinar, and you can watch a little sample of it. But it was a 2+ hour long webinar interactive webinar that we gave on power and grounding, and just like the basics, getting started wiring a race car, chassis car, whatever you're working on. Which that's an appropriate time to segue into finally have our first class on the calendar. I am combining the basics and advanced from yesteryears this year into what I'll call RealTuners 2020. Basically, we're just cutting out some of the fluff, but we're going to start right off tuning cars. Between 3 and 5 cars we'll have live at this event. This one's going to be March 28th and 29th in Palm Bay, Florida. Very worth checking out. Orlando is an hour away or less. It's easy to fly into. There's a lot of good places to stay that are affordable there. Highly recommend this. It's been open for 24 hours and it's about 1/3 full already, so plenty of seats left. But sign up if you know you are going to be able to, or you want to make this one. Sign up. It's $100 to reserve a seat. It's $550 prepaid for the whole class. It lasts 2 days. You get 2 free lunches, very good catered lunches and drinks and snacks for the time. Lots of Q&A. Lots of interesting cars coming to this one. Big Power Nitrous car, one of Mike's friends. We've got Rick Lind is going to bring his Talladega, his land speed racing Talladega. It's got a modern NASCAR Mopar engine with twin turbos on it, manual trans car. They're looking for that to maybe set a power record. Who else we got? One of Big Daddy's Super guys is talking about bringing their car down. A lot of interesting variety as far as cars volunteering to come to this class, and it's going to be at Trick Pro Motorsports, and again March 28th and 29th. You can get more info at RealTuners.com. Just click on live EFI classes, or you can go straight to RealTuners.com/product/Palm Bay. But anyway, that's all I got there. You guys got anything else you want to talk about before we wind down? Going once? Going twice? Nobody?
I'm good.
Right on. Well, thanks, Troy, for joining us. Thanks for helping us get our next week guest, too. Yeah. Next week, we're looking at Shannon Davis. We tried to get him on this week. He had a schedule conflict at the last minute. So we are going to have him, it sounds like next week is what we have scheduled. So Right on.
Yeah, we got Barnhill on the hook too to discuss the Nexus and all that stuff.
As soon as they can talk
whenever
about the
his
Nexus,
schedule.
they're going to be lots of talk about that. So that's the Haltech product. But all right, well, we'll wind you guys out. Everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Hope everybody has a good, safe week. Keep warm. Try not to freeze your butt off in this weather. And we will be back to talk to you guys next week. So peace out, everyone. Take care. And thanks again. And we're clear.